Genesis chapter 41. Pharaoh's dreams. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking, fat, and they fed in the meadow. There's a lot going on in there again. And it's strange. It's strange how deep you can get on this. And it's strange how deep most people don't get on this. It's strange how every word is like every word is a paragraph. Every word is a link to another thing. So if we take a look at that again, like every word, then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. Well, if you're reading the Bible at church and you read that sentence, the preacher probably doesn't stop and go, I wonder why they told us 2 years. I'm sure it's important. And they just blow it off. They could have just said, and then it came to pass after some time. And then it came to pass. And then not mentioned, but they took the time to say after 2 full years. Probably means something. After 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream. Why do I care that Pharaoh had a dream? He stood by the river. Who cares? And then I want to know his dream. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows. Suddenly there were 7 cows coming out of the water, but that's not what happened. They came out of the river. And they're cows. They're not hippos. Hippos come out of the river all the time. Crocodiles. But a cow, why is a cow coming out of a river? Cows are in the field. Right? But there's cows coming out of the river. And then 7 cows? Not a few cows. Not some cows. 7 cows. Pharaoh Imhotep III? Pharaoh Tutmosis? Pharaoh Akhenaten? Exactly. I can remember the number of cows, but the name of Pharaoh escapes them. And they fed in the meadow. Then 7 other cows came up out of the river. So he's still counting cows. I mean, I've heard of counting sheep, but maybe he's dreaming. So maybe when you dream, you just automatically count animals? And now he's judging the beauty of cows while counting them. So these are ugly cows. That must be important too. I'm sure it's important that they're beautiful, but then it must be important that they're not. Ugly and gaunt. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly cows ate up the 7 fine-looking fat cows. Pretty sure that's how you get mad cow disease. These cows aren't supposed to eat cows. But it is just a dream, so it's fine. Oh, and then Pharaoh woke up because that's such a disturbing dream. But then he went back to sleep. So he slept and dreamed a second time. They really want you to know that Pharaoh had dreams. 2 of them, to be exact. And they they mean the same thing, but they're slightly different. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on 1 stalk, plump and good. There wasn't 2 stalks. There's just one. Just 1 stalk of grain. Plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind. Could just be scorched by the sun. Could just be 7 thin heads. Why do they need to be blighted by the east wind? Sprang up after them, and the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump full heads. Look, I'm old enough that I can say that, or I'm old enough that when I say, so far, I've yet to see grain cannibalization. So that's quite the image as well. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. Yeah, you think? He just dreamed of water cows eating each other and cannibalistic grain. I'm a little troubled just thinking about it. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret the dream for Pharaoh. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day, When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, we each had a dream in one night. He and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. They didn't go to the dungeon. They brought Pharaoh out of the dungeon. And he shaved. Do I need to know he shaved? Yes, I do. Why do I need to know? Changed his clothing. Do I need to know about his grooming habits? I must, because they've spent some time in more than one step telling me how it is that Joseph comes out of a dungeon. He comes out shaving and wearing new clothes. And he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph said to Pharaoh, saying, it's not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat. They fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt. Such ugliness that I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. He really wants you to know how ugly those cows are. Those are some fucking ugly cows. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. I also saw my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Yeah, he didn't fail to mention the one stalk again. And behold, 7 heads, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them, and the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows, which came up after them, are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads, blighted by the east wind, are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise. And all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because of the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh. And let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. Have you really ever just sat and looked at the words? I'm sure you have, but the Bible is it's very interesting how you can read a story, hear a story, and never hear or read the story. I made my little video like I did the one for chapter 40, and I put that out first. Only this time, I think it's so obvious it hurts. So let me back up. For the record, if you haven't seen anything else before, I am stating that the book of Genesis is all of Western history, from ancient Sumer to like the first George Bush, to the fall of communism, to the rise of the, what do I call that? The unipolar world, to the end of Pax Americana, to the advent of the internet. Well, yeah, I'm aware I'm about to go down a road, but we'll come back. We will break this down. But one of the big complaints of we can call them atheists or non-Christians or unbelievers or people that read a book like the Bible and think, no, nope. And one of the complaints is it appears at first glance, for good reason. I mean, it's not that hard to come to these conclusions, that the Bible is about 2,000 years of history between like 2000 BC and the death of Jesus. Maybe we can give it the 100 years after Jesus, right? So maybe 2,000, 2,100 years. And somewhere around 180, the Bible is finished. Now the one caveat is somehow Revelation will be there in the future. And so because it's not come yet, Christianity has become a notoriously messianic, apocalyptic cult, according to other people. And so it's hard to believe in a God that can just have a book written as long ago as it is about. So if it's only about 2,000 years, well, it's been about 2,000 years since the last time we got an update. So it's unbelievably irrelevant. I have a shirt from 5 years ago that's unbelievably irrelevant. I found an iPhone 3 in a drawer the other day that I'm pretty sure I can't even connect. That's irrelevant, right? It's irrelevant. That's outdated. I have VHS tapes that unbelievably irrelevant. So to say that something is still relevant after 2,000 years, that's a big ask. That's a real big ask. And I would say one of the hang-ups I had in the past before I really just, I don't know what road I'm on. I don't know how I found this. I don't know. I just know that once you start looking at phrases like I just pointed out in the whole thing, you come to these conclusions because it's not really a choice. This appears to be what it's saying. So one of my contentions was this story, right? This 3,500, 4,000-year-old story. This is important enough where I need to spend time with an unknown pharaoh and his 14 cow dreams. It doesn't really relate to anything historical. It's just it's a good metaphor of life or something like that. I'm not really sure how you can justify this story. But, a good Christian will say, no, this is true. And then you say, when did it happen? And they say, it's true. And you're like, oh, whoa, where is it though? I've got 17 history books here, just tell me what chapter to go to. And they say, it's true. And then you're like, okay. And then they'll find some obscure tablet somewhere out in the desert, and it'll say, there was a famine once. And they go, look, there was a famine once. I'm like, well, I give up. You got me. You got me. There was a famine once in Kemet. God. I thought I had something. Keep going. So what I'm trying to say is, Pharaoh's dream's important, But World War II didn't seem to make the cut. Napoleon, like a war so incredibly big that they just called it the World War II, like Ghostbusters 2. So not only is it a world war, it's a sequel. It happened twice. And it just so happens that that happened after Napoleon, which I'm saying is chapter 40. So that's interesting. How far away did it happen? Does it fit in the timeline? Well, we'll get to that. And that Napoleon thing just happened to happen right after the French Revolution, which was also chapter 40. And that happened right after chapter 39, which I'm saying is the American Revolution and the French and Indian War. So that happened right after chapter 37, because 38 was the Judah Tamar story. So right after 37, which is where Joseph wore a coat of many colors and was sold into slavery, which I am saying is the 30 Years' War of 1648 and the ongoing colonization of the New World. So in my version, ginormous, unbelievable, earth-shaking things are occurring in the order of which the story is telling you. The problem is, nobody gave me permission to do this. So you've never heard it, so it sounds like I'm out of my goddamn mind. But you're not out of your mind if you believe an unnamed pharaoh having dreams about cannibal corn is okay. That's fine. There's nothing weird about that. And the fact that you could be militant about it is equally fine. So forgive me, but I'm going to continue to say, because the first time somebody said the world was round, heads rolled and people died. Now, if you say the earth is flat, you're an idiot. I'm actually not saying either one is true. I'm just saying, like, that's the same thing with the same humans with a way different result. One year, it was impossible to run a 4-minute mile. Within a year after it was broken, 1,200 people had done it. Like, this just might be the first time you hear something seemingly absurd, like Genesis is recent history. It's all of history, but this latter part is our history, a history in which you, the unbeliever, are now brought into it. Is it me projecting? Maybe. Who knows? It is quite uncanny. Once you let go of what is supposed to be true, it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. So let's go back to the beginning. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. Okay. 2 full years after what? Well, let's take a look. What did I say? Uh-oh. Oh, broke the computer. So, 2 full years after chapter 40. And interestingly, Chapter 40 starts with the phrase, "It came to pass after these things," which connected it to 39. So there is a succession of after these things. And if I am saying the prisoner's dreams of the French Revolution, it's 2 full years after the French Revolution. The problem becomes, where do we start the timer, and what do we mean by 2 full years? So one thing is true: Genesis math is not your math, and hopefully I'm pointing that out. I would say, the best I can tell, and I've been saying it's not a formula, but it is kind of a formula, because the problem is, once you start doing Bible math, and it's over. But we're gonna do some Bible math. So the French Revolution, I said, was Pharaoh's birthday, July 14th, 1789. So is it 2 full years after that? I'm going to say no, because it was 3 days after the dream that the baker had his head cut off. And so when did Louis the 16th, when was he executed? Well, let's see. Louis the 18th was executed in 1793. So on one end, it's 2 years from that, but it's not 2 years. So the math I'm referring to is, it seems to be something like 1 year is 10 years and 1 day is 1 year. It's something like that. Is it 100% on money? I don't know, because they didn't say exactly from this day to, they just gave you a basic 20 years from the French Revolution. Well, that's a good point. Is that the French Revolution beginning? Is that the execution of Louis the 16th? Is that 20 years from the end of Napoleon? Is that 20 years from the end of the first exile? Like, exactly which 20? Now, it doesn't matter in the normal understanding. It's 2 years after some imaginary time where there's 7 years and 7 years. So it's all imaginary anyway. So I'm at least giving you straws, which is way, way more than... I'm giving you pretty decent approximations of time that follow each other linearly to a conclusion. So that's freaking amazing. So let's just say 20 years after the dreams came true, which would be the execution and the rise of the French Empire. So it's a tough one. If we say 1793 is the starting spot, well, then that would take us to 1813-ish. Just because we're not really 100% sure. Are they saying 1795 is as the French begin their attempt, where they kind of start cooling off on some of the reign of terror stuff, and Napoleon starts to be a general, and there's wars with other Europe? Are we talking like the beginning of stability, 1795? Because that would take you to 1815, and 1815 would take you I don't know, to somewhere around the end of Napoleon in his Battle of Waterloo. But if you really want to kind of keep that going, then Napoleon sort of lingered in exile for another 5-6 years. So that would be 1820-ish. And who's having the dream? Pharaoh's having the dream. And what have we said Pharaoh is? Pharaoh is the king of the dead. And who's the king of the corporations? And who's the king corporation? I had said it was the British East India Company, but more importantly, what is the British? Who does that work for, right? There's even another layer deeper. And if you really had to be specific, it would be the bankers, like the people bankrolling wars and the people bankrolling companies and the people bankrolling governments, right? They're the true king of corporation. That's funny, because that word bank, I feel like that came up a second ago. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and he stood by the river. What's by the side of a river? A bank. And how do you know it's a river and not, say, like a pond? Oh, because a river has a current. There's a current on the bank that allows things to flow. Now these again are, Jordan Maxwell did this a long time ago, so it's not even me, but the river, and this goes back to my first couple videos, is the serpent. The serpent is the merchant. So Pharaoh stood on the bank of the serpent of commerce and watched 7 fat cows come out of the commerce, the trade, the economy, the bank. 7 fat cows. And even on the same serpent video, we had a cow. And the cow was related to the moon, but the cow was an old Egyptian, which just happens to be where we are, is an old Egyptian motif for you had the cow, you had the golden calf, not the silver calf, not the ceramic calf, not the wooden calf, not the metal calf, not the baked clay calf. You had the golden calf. So in this case, you've got 7 of those cows, those golden cows. It doesn't say golden, I'm implying here. 7 fat, gloriously rich, happy economies coming out of the bank of the corporation. And it fed in the meadow for 7 years in Egypt. In Egypt, I spent that last video talking about Egypt. Egypt means tribulation. This sounds like the good tribulation, where the next 7 seems like the great tribulation, the bad tribulation. But it's neither of those things, but it is close. So for 7 years, and I just said 1 year is equal to 10 years. So let's actually caveat that. So for 70 years, the bankers engaged in commerce in Egypt, in the land of democracy, in the land of republics, after the hated shepherds, after the kings are beginning to be challenged. There's 7 great years. But first we have a dream about 7 or 70 good years and then 70 bad years. But before those start, it's 20 years after the Napoleonic Wars. Or it's the Napoleonic Wars end 20 years after they start. Or the age of the French Revolution, French Empire, lasts for about 20 years. Which, what do you know? It lasts for about 20 years. And so after that, in fact, it's at the Battle of Waterloo. In fact, in conspiracy world, what's interesting is conspiracy, like, if you get into the alternative media, if you get into alternative history, if you get into these things, it doesn't take long before you find certain canons of conspiracy. And one of the sacred stories of your conspiracy world is the story of Mayer Rothschild's rise to power. And there's even a movie. I should maybe include some clips, but there's a movie made back in, it's black and white, so it's got to be 30s, 40s, 50s, but I don't think it's quite that old, about the rise of the Rothschild banking family. And the way it happened is he had something like 4 or 5 sons. And so he made each of his 5 sons disperse to 5 of the important countries of Europe and start banking houses. One of those was Nathaniel Rothschild went to London, which is London's a fun one. London in conspiracy canon is like the Vatican. There's London, and then there's the city of London. And it's like a 1 mile area that is, it's well known, that is surrounded by 13 dragons. It is its own sovereign state that is older than the rest of London and is home to most of the world's most important banks. Can't make that up. So it's within the city of London that on the day of the Battle of Waterloo, that Mayor with the Rothschilds, I don't remember which one exactly, had informants. They had their own intelligence gathering apparatus, as the corporate world does today, right? So intelligence is almost as big in the corporate world as it is in the governmental world, and that's not my opinion. You can look into that. So on that day, he had informants that were watching the battle, and then they watched Napoleon lose the battle, And somehow they were able to speed to the city of London before the other news had spread on its normal speed, right? Whatever the speed of news is, there's no cell phones or telegraphs or anything like that. So there has to be an actual physical movement of the news from Belgium to London. So he's able to do that faster than the other people. And because he's able to do that, he's able to work the stock market. And so he starts spreading this rumor that Napoleon won. It started selling everything. And so in his ruse, he creates a panic. He creates a run. And prices just begin to plummet on all kinds of things. And then he waits a certain amount of time until it's just right. And then he orders all of his, I guess he must have brokers in the broker house, but he begins buying. And so within a fairly short amount of time, the Rothschild banking company had cornered the market on money in Europe in one day. It just happened to be the day of the end of the Napoleonic era. And it happened to be right before the rise of, what do they call that? Well, officially, it's called the Revolutions of 1848. So, a little bit after the time we're talking about. So if we're talking about 1815 to 1820-ish, which just, it's beautiful. Pharaoh, and he, on the bank with his cows, has a dream. And he dreams that 7 fat, plump cows, 7 fat, plump grains will come. But then, and I'm saying, and Joseph says, oh, that means you're going to have 7 years of plenty. And I'm saying, well, Genesis math says 70 years of plenty. And then you're going to have 70 years of the hot east wind. That ugly old hot east wind scorching the cows and the grain. So what we need now, we know a starting point for the dream, but that is not the starting point of the 7 years, because if you read the rest of the story, there has to be time for Joseph to interpret it, because the magicians aren't any good, but by God, Joseph is a dream expert. If you want your dreams to come true or know what they mean, you call Joseph. And Joseph is described in this story, if you remember, the chief butler of France says, hey, now that you mention it, there was this one guy. There was this young Hebrew man, a servant of the captain of the guard. Now, Hebrew is one of those words, and it simply has nothing to do with the traditional, let's say, Jewish people. If you, any more than Egypt has anything to do with Egypt in this story. Egypt means tribulation, and Egypt means democracy, and Egypt means Republican rule with a focus on money. Like, the chief head of the government is the economy, whether that's under capitalism or socialism, and the head of the people is the second in command, the, what do you call him? Either the president or the prime minister, who is in charge of everything in the land, second only to the economy itself, or the moneyed interest themselves. So in this story, there's a Hebrew, there's a man. So Hebrew means a person who crosses over. Well, crossed over from where? Well, I'm saying you crossed over from Israel. And what is Israel? Well, Israel is Jacob. And what is Jacob? Jacob is Rome, but Rome is split into two. So you have Eastern Rome, which is Judah, but that's Jacob. But when Jacob crosses over, we haven't gotten into that, but when Jacob crosses Shechem, he wrestles with God and changes his name. God changes his name to Israel. So I'll have to go back and tell you that story, but when you come over to the Western Rome, the lost tribes of Israel, not the tribe of Judah that we know where they are, not the Eastern Rome that stayed on after the fall of the old Western tribes. So Western Europe, Western Roman Empire, the sons of, there's really only 10, but we don't need to get into that, but Europe. So if you crossed over from Europe, well, at this time that I'm claiming, there's only, who crossed over to Europe? Well, if I said Joseph is America as personified, he's more things but personified. He's America. And America, you remember at the time around the French Revolution, was in custody of the house of the captain of the guard, who I said was the strong arm of the British East India Company. And who would that be? That would be the British Empire itself. And which people that came over were in the house of the British Empire? Those would be the American colonialists. And so they're saying, hey, there's this guy, America. And what is America? And this is a whole nother video. It's a fun video, but it's a whole nother video. So oh Jesus, there's so much stuff. America is Joseph, and Joseph is Egypt. In Egypt, so if I could describe America, it would be at least this America. 11 and 666. But mostly Egypt, right? So it's like Joseph is Osiris. Joseph is Osiris. So, and Osiris is the dead. So if you want your dreams interpreted, you go to Osiris. For whatever reason, you go to Osiris. So there's a Hebrew man. There's a man that used to be in Europe but is now in the New World, that was under the colonies, but they broke with those, which caused the pharaohs to kind of have a problem, which ultimately led to the execution of the baker, but the butler's still hanging around, and he's saying, oh yeah, I totally forgot about him. I told him I would talk to him, but I didn't. And that's what he says. The chief baker spoke to Pharaoh saying, I remember my faults this day. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Go ask him. He'll tell you. And so Joseph interprets the dream, and he says, the 7 cows are 7 good years, and the 7 ugly cows are 7 bad years. And so what we need is a starting place, right? We have a starting place for the dream, but we need a starting place for your 7 good years. And I just showed you there's something called the revolutions of 1848. And it's one of those things that somehow I remember history and I remember reading. That one didn't. I'm sure it was mentioned somewhere. I was probably sleeping that day. But if you just look at what it is, the revolutions of 1848 was a series of republican revolts against European monarchies. They ended in failure, but they definitely started the ball rolling. So from 1748, you can see that Europe began to go to Egypt as well. So if Egypt represents democracy and republican rule and getting rid of the living king for a dead one, America has done it, France did it, and now Europe is going to do it. How many countries? There was so many countries. I forget. Let's take a look real quick. It's called the Springtime of the Peoples. Over 50 countries. So this was no small thing. Spontaneously combusted into cries for self-rule. So let's call this the beginning of the 7 good years, because it's related to Egypt. So Egypt's about to have 70 banner years. So from 1848, and if we add 70, that would take us to 1918. So I need to find somewhere in history, and historically speaking, it may not start exactly 1848, but you can see how I can say 1848 sticks out like a sore thumb in the world of democratic rule, which is what Egypt is. And something that I want to show you as well is after Joseph interprets the dream, so the dream hasn't come true because it happens right before it all starts to go down. So right about that time, Pharaoh says, hey, democracy, I'm going to put you in charge. That's huge. I'm going to put democratic republic rule in charge of a lot of things. And where is it? So it was right before it started. Then Joseph was put in charge. And he gathered all. Oh, so there it was. Here it is. Right before he put him in charge. And right after the butler goes, oh yeah, I forgot there's this guy Joseph. Then right here. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. Then the banks called Republican democracies, and they brought him out of the dungeon, quickly out of the dungeon. So now we're talking about Joseph. So Joseph is two things. As a personification, as a person, as a man, as a country, Joseph is America. But as an ideal, right? So you can be more than one thing. They wrote the rules. This is how the rules work. So as an ideal, this idea of self-governance, Joseph was brought out of the dungeon, and the dungeon is where the Hebrews went. So he went out of there. So he must be going back to where he came from. So if you come out, then you go back. But you're not going back to Israel, but you are going back to where the dungeon isn't, which is Europe, but not Israel Europe, Egypt Europe. And so where is this new Egypt Europe? That would be where democracy is starting to flourish. So in your Western democratic European areas, Joseph is brought out. So take a look at this. Brought out of the dungeon. He is shaved. And shaved is, you'll see that in the Bible. Like, if you're in the wilderness, you have long hair. Samson had long hair. And his hair was the source of his strength. So when you shave your head, number one, the priests of Egypt shaved their heads. So it's important that if you're going to be a priest for Pharaoh, you had to be pretty hairless. That's a standard move. But the other thing it's denoting is a change. So he shaved and changed his clothing. And clothing is, in the Bible, clothing always denotes a change in leadership, and it can denote like a change in like area. So if he's going from America to Europe as the same person, you have the same personification with a new look, meaning you're not American democracy, you're European democracy. And American democracy, because he's still Joseph. But republicanism is moving into the land of the shepherds, right? It's slowly taking over. And you'll see how the rest of Genesis is all about that. So when does Joseph come over and begin in Europe? Why, I would say that would be 1848. So I'm calling that the beginning of 70 years. Did anything happen between 1848 and 1918? Huh. And again, there is a moment of transition in real history versus the story. So the story is clean, history is not. So in the exact time period is something called the Gilded Age. It's called an age when things flourished. That just so happens to be the time when railroads came online, electricity came online, the telegraph, steam, industrialization was raging. Your 7 good years, right? And who benefited from industrialization? A little bit of everybody. Hence, there was great plenty in all of Egypt. So everybody was doing a little better, right? But mostly, it was your industrialists. It was your robber barons. It was your handful that ended up on a single stalk, plump and good, that brought so much that they were able to store it in all of the cities. In fact, what does it say again? It says, and also I saw my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. And then the interpretation is the 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are 1. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. All of your democratic republic areas are going to see a massive influx in the standard of living. These brand new inventions are going to bring such wealth that everybody benefits, but mostly these 7 are going to benefit. And so because of that, Joseph says, now therefore let Pharaoh select, let Pharaoh do this, let him appoint officers over the land, let him have, in these new republics, let him have prime ministers and parliaments, that secretly are working for Pharaoh, but they're now over the land. And what's their main purpose? To collect taxes. 1/5 of the produce, right? We're going to get our cut of the land of Egypt. And they're going to gather all of that revenue and all of those inventions and all of these new things coming online during the first, second, and third industrial industrial revolutions. And we're going to keep them in cities as a reserve. So in many ways, this food is the industrialization, right? Industrialization is the 7 good years that happened in your new formed democratic places. And why do they have democracies? Because industrialization led to a rise in social consciousness. And he laid up in every city the food of the field which surrounded them. In this sentence, because right before I read this sentence, there is a direct vein. If you understand the story of Joseph, you understand much. And this is what everybody wants to know. So here you go. You understand much of the book of Revelation. In fact, in many ways, the trumpets of Revelation are the 7 good years and the 7 bad years are your trumpets of Revelation. Just trust me, we'll get to that. And if you're not sure you believe that, Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea. Follow me, please, ladies and gentlemen, to the most famous chapter of the book of Revelation. Chapter 13. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having how many heads on a single stalk? Oh, 7. 7. And this is so much, I'm not even going to get into this, but just the very first sentence is I stood on the sand of the sea, which just happens to be exactly how much good came out of the 7 good years. So much as the sand of the sea. So I'm saying the 7 good years begin in 1848 at an event called the Revolutions of 1848. And if you notice, what happened was a group of democratic, liberal, nationalistic, working class, bourgeoisie, middle class, reformers sought the end of absolute monarchy. But at the end, it didn't quite pan out 100%, but it definitely started the thing. So you have 7 heads on one stalk. So what happens when 7 heads get all the stuff? And isn't it fun that it's 7? How many times have I said 7 is... In fact, after the last video, I can now say, since we've introduced the concept, 7 is Dionysus. 11 is Apollo. These are just things you need to know. So, the liberal elite, technocratic, utopian do-gooders were able to produce industrialization, right, to their benefit. Harnessing science and technology does in fact produce massive wealth. Unfortunately, when the banker is at the tail end of that, well, the society will benefit. Some benefit a lot. And in fact, Joseph had 2 sons with the wife that was given to him by Pharaoh. Because if we didn't really read that part, but if you look at the story again, and to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came. So before 1918, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, wasn't that the lady that was trying to rape, that was trying to seduce Joseph and accused him of rape? So that lady had a daughter and he married her. And wasn't Potiphar England? So if a belief is the woman, so the daughter of Parliament, the female offspring of a parliament limited monarchy would be, what would you call that? The United States of America's republic? Democracy, which was... So Joseph, America personified, married republicanism and just cut out the king, because there's no king with Pharaoh. The king was Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is not an Israeli shepherd king. He is a dead king. He's a corporation. He's a bank. He's money. So America married republicanism, and the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On. And On, you should go look it up, I won't do it right now, is synonymous with the city of Heliopolis, the city of the sun. Pharaoh means the sun. So literally he marries republicanism based in corporatism. And he called his first children, so this new Republican wave that is now coming out of the dungeon and going back to Europe has 2 sons, right? This merger of America and Republican democracy has 2 children, especially when he goes over to Europe in the form of European democracies. And then those 2 children are Ephraim and Manasseh. And Manasseh is the oldest. And Manasseh means, for God has made me forget the toil of all. So for God has made me forget all of my toil in all of my father's house. Toil. Democracy. 1848. Toil, democracy, 1848 Europe. Forget my toil and my father's house. So who's the father? Well, in this case, the father is Joseph. And who's Joseph's father? Jacob. And who's Jacob? Jacob represents the shepherd kings, the kings of Europe, the old Roman system. So who makes you forget? So if you're forgetting kings, you're embracing democratic toil 1848 Europe. Which brings me to Exhibit A. Karl Marx is famous for coming out with his Communist Manifesto in 1848 Europe, which is about workers, the rights of workers against the ruling class, right? So he's for the working class, the proletariat. So 1848, toil, workers of the world unite, forget the monarchies and the ruling class, forget them, forget your toil, forget your struggle. Let's unite about the struggle so that we can make a better utopian world for the worker against the rulers. I believe that would be Manasseh, who was born definitely before the 7 bad years. So if communism and socialism is Manasseh, then Ephraim would be capitalism, his opposite twin brother. Birthed out of this new republicanism, birthed out of the New World, birthed from the corporatism. And so Ephraim was more like ultimately the blessing went to Ephraim and not Manasseh, but Manasseh was also great. And we'll get into that, but just on a surface level, if the first good years is your industrialization in your industrialists, in your capitalists, well, historically speaking, there's some blowback from that. And if the goal of the 1848 revolutions was to end monarchy, the result of 1918 was the end of monarchies. The end of the 7 good years ended in the end of monarchies as a general rule in Europe and the rise of democratic socialism, which led to 7 years, what do they say, scorched by the east wind. Now, we haven't gotten into this, but in the same book of Revelation, there's a giant army that comes over the Euphrates. So there's this east and westness. So if the west, boy, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Let's just say if industrialization and the Gilded Age, and if you watch that video I made, all of these well-dressed people represent the 7 good years, and the opposite of that is the financial depressions, the aftermath of the First World War that led to the financial depressions, and the financial depressions led to the rise of communism and socialism, which led to the rise of hell on earth, but it's hell on earth for 70 years. So from 1918, and you add 70, that takes you to 1988. So somewhere around 1988, if the bad years are only 7, if this east wind blowing that represents the opposite of good, bountiful capitalism at its best, it would represent socialism at its worst, in addition to the Great Depression, World War II. So what happened after World War II? Well, everything was fine in the West, right? Right? You know, when rock and roll kicked in the 60s, went off, and the Cultural Revolution came in, and morals were thrown out, and society was changed, and the world became one big commercial. That's great. There's nothing sad and depressing about modern Western life, right? That's on one hand. We can see that as a benefit, or maybe now in hindsight, we can see that as a bit of a east wind. Because it took a minute to actually turn Europe from this old, beautiful, thing into this newer, post-industrial, modern, commercialized thing. And then, you know, as it kicked in, everybody begins to go to Egypt. So all of the old monarchies is everywhere, and democracy takes over everywhere, which means corporatism takes over everywhere, which means you live in a world of Pharaoh owning everything, which is exactly what the last few chapters of Genesis are going to talk about. But what happens around 1988 then? That would be the end of, say, Manasseh-like world of socialism and communism. Was that ever a thing till 1988? So here we go. This is from our own State Department. And you can see that in 1 year, like magic, communism fell everywhere in Europe. Just, it's not 1988. So if your bad years are through 88, I guess then the next year is you're out of that and into something new. And that corresponds with something else called Pax Americana. Pax Americana is when America made a covenant with many nations, claiming peace and prosperity for 70 years. If that sounds familiar, Revelations fans, maybe you're beginning to see something right after a beast, after somebody stands on the sand of the sea and watches a beast rise out of the sea. So for 70 years, America is the protector of the world and the world's oceans and the world's economy and democracy and freedom and all of those things. But it begins to wane, and officially Pax Americana ends in 1992. But unofficially, it's because of the fall of the Soviet Union. And when does the Soviet Union fall in and communism fall in 1989 to 1991. So right at that same thing. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it that crazy? If you really, really look at it. Am I out of line? Maybe. Or maybe we have spent so much time listening to dispensationalists who have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, that you just were told it's a magic trick. You're told, look right here, when in fact, it's over there. So, this is what Genesis 41 means, which lines up with Genesis 40, 39, 37, all the way to the end, which I just gave away because basically the next 8 chapters is the story I just told you in clear, unbelievable detail once you know the words and how to interpret them. And just for fun, I think we'll start with Revelation next time because I just introduced you to the trumpets. You just didn't know it. You're looking for magical rainbows and fairies. It's in the future, right? Well, it was 100 years ago, 300 years ago. Because if 7 years is good for Genesis, and that's 70 years, and it's probably good for Revelation too. Just think about it.